You know, as investors, income statements can be annoying and they can just piss us off. But once we understand the terminology of the documents, they're actually very simple to understand. Today we're going to go over the first line of an income statement, that is the revenue section. We'll explain the definition, then we'll see how it applies to individual stocks. So let's get into this. So what is total revenue? Total revenue is all the money that the company brings in from the selling of its goods and services and the money that the company brings in from the use of its assets. Okay? So now let's look at a brief little example. For a moment, imagine that you wanted to buy shares in a company like Amazon. You were thinking about it, but you wanted to see if the company was still bringing in good revenue. How would you determine that? First, you go to income statement of Amazon. And under that income statement, you'd probably look at the annual report. See, there's annual and there's quarterly. So you'd probably start off by looking at the annual. You'd have to remember that all the numbers on this document are in thousands. And then you go to total revenue. And under total revenue, you'd see a number of $230 billion because numbers are in thousands. So $230 billion, that's a lot of money, but we have to compare it to the past. If we look into the past, we see that Amazon was only bringing in $107 billion. Now the company's bringing in $230 billion. So they've obviously brought in way more money, which is good if we're a growth investor. See, there's a difference between growth investors and value investors. And whenever we buy a stock, it's important to know whether or not this stock that we're buying is a growth stock or a value stock. See, a growth stock typically likes to see revenue growing. If revenue's growing, typically a growth stock will rise as well. A value stock, on the other hand, doesn't really care so much about the growth of revenue. Typically, a value stock cares more about the growth in earnings and the overall value of the company. Now, there are exceptions and things can change. Let me show you an example. Looking at Amazon again, Amazon's a growth stock. They have their revenue is growing, right? Let's look at another growth stock. Let's look at Tesla. Tesla, their revenue is growing. See, we have 21 billion 5 years ago, 4 billion, huge revenue growth. Let's look at a company like Pepsi. This is a value stock. If we look at Pepsi, their revenue is not really growing at all. In 2015, their revenue was 63 billion. Now their revenue is 64 billion. That's barely any growth. Let's look at Coke. Coke's revenue has actually dropped. It went from 44 billion to 31 billion. But Coke is a value stock. And because of that, their stock price hasn't crashed. Their stock price has actually gone up, even though their revenues have gone down. It's likely, though, that Coke's profit has remained at a relatively high level. So some companies are value stocks, some companies are growth stocks. It's important to understand whether or not the stock we're buying is a value stock or a growth stock or somewhere in between. And then it's important to understand what is motivating shareholders to buy our company or sell our company, okay? Because we're not the only one buying or selling this stock. Let's move on now to the cost of revenue.